Right now, nearly 2 billion people have little to no access to the gospel. These are frontier people groups. Our goal is to see God glorified through an abundance of Christ followers in every people group. This is Joshua Project. Welcome to the Joshua Project podcast. I'm Dylan, your host, and today we're going to dive into the reason why we talk about reaching people groups and not just countries. Joining us today is the Director of People and Culture at Joshua Project, Duane Fraiser. Duane, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
So before we get into the big questions, Duane, would you just give us a quick snapshot? Tell us who you are and how you ended up at Joshua Project.
Sure thing. Well, I was born in upstate New York. I'm actually currently visiting there right now, my hometown, and studied at Bethany Global University in Minnesota. That used to be called Bethany College of Missions. And while I was there, I did an internship year in Mexico. And that was in the mid 90s. And then I returned in 2002 to specifically to work with research regarding people groups in Mexico. It can surprise some people that Mexico would need people group research, but there's a fair number of other languages than Spanish spoken there. So I was I worked with Comi Mex there, Missions Alliance of Mexico. And I was doing a project for translating people group profiles into Spanish for Comi Bomb. And we just needed some sources for people groups. And I stumbled onto this website one day, and it was the Joshua Project. And my coworker and I, we just we really looked to Joshua Project for people group information, and we started communicating with them. And we created from this project of collecting these profiles in Spanish, we created the website Ethnopedia. It's just profiles in several languages on the website. So that really prepared me for what I'm doing with Joshua Project. I had made a commitment in 2005 to join Joshua Project. In the meantime, there was this a translator or actually a native speaker kind of helping us with our information. And her name's Erica, and now it's Erica Frasier. I married her, and we went to Spain to launch this project that was centered around Ethnopedia. And after that time, I made a commitment to come join Joshua Project. I live currently in Colorado Springs with my wife and our oldest, Michael. He was born in Oaxaca, Mexico. And our youngest was born in Colorado Springs. So yeah, just our staff is growing. And so recently became moved from what I was doing and became the director of people and culture with Joshua Project. When I came on board, we had 3 staff members, and today we're over 40. So we didn't need a people and culture director, but now we do.
Right on. So, Duane, when you first got into missions, moving to Mexico, were you already thinking in terms of people groups, or were you thinking in terms of, I'm going to Mexico? How did that work?
Yeah, I would say I always grew up hearing missions through the lens of geography. And so even when I was in Bible college and mission school, I was interested in Tajikistan at one time and teaching English in China. And then, yeah, when I first went to Mexico, I was just thinking kind of monolithically about Mexico and Spanish speakers. So once I arrived there, that really opened my eyes to the reality of people group distinctions. So Oaxaca, as I mentioned, has a lot of people groups living in just that state. Mexico has almost 300 people groups that for whom Spanish is a second language.
So if someone's never heard the term people group before, how do you explain it to them without losing them in the first 30 seconds?
Yeah, one thing I'd say right away is we need to avoid thinking of it as just a group of people, although it is a grouping of people that have an affinity around several things, several very important things: religion, language, and then cultural traditions. So they're again, they have this affinity, and communication can flow among that grouping of people, but it can't easily flow from the outside because of barriers.
So then why isn't it enough to just say, there are Christians in Mexico, there are Christians in India, there's a church in Morocco. What is that kind of framing miss?
Yeah, I think we it just kind of makes everything monolithic, I would say. There are a lot of Christians in China. Every day, we understand that about 10,000 people come to Christ in China. And so you could really begin to think that, well, China's in good shape. I mean, there are millions of believers. I think there's more believers in Christ in China than there are members of the Communist Party in China. And so, yeah, you could think, oh yeah, the gospel has pretty much taken root there, but you would be ignoring about 400 people groups that live. Oh, actually, over 400 people groups in China. Chinese is their second language. It's not their heart language. Their culture, their traditions, their belief system is different. Um, I'm sure it's influenced by the this is usually influenced by kind of the national language and kind of the overarching culture. But there's differences, and again, those barriers are in place. Those barriers to understanding and acceptance of the gospel. And so same thing in Mexico, just you would think of, oh, Spanish, and this is the traditions of Mexico. But and living there, so surprised, actually had to help people in Mexico understand how to be culturally sensitive when they would go in the mountains and in the villages, where they would speak Mixtec or Zapotec, Trique, Amuzgo, all these, almost 300 uh, languages spoken there.
So what does this mean for church planters and missionaries working in one of these countries where they're currently reaching the 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 national people group, the largest people group? They're planting churches, say in Chinese and Mandarin, but they want to reach specifically one of these people groups. Does it require a different strategy? Does it require another team?
Yeah, I think it requires an intentionality. And so you're not going to just I don't think you're going to just automatically bump into how to do ministry among those people. You're going to have to be intentional about learning the language if that's different than the national language. Going to have to be very intentional about their yeah, their traditions, their beliefs as different from the kind of culture that permeates that nation. So yeah, again, intentionality is the key. You can't just accidentally go from a national focus to an ethnic focus.
Yeah, one of the things that was really interesting for me as I began to understand people groups, hearing the term unreached people groups, is at first I kind of assumed that these unreached people groups in countries were either part of the main nationality or they were kind of immigrants to that country, so that the smaller minority people groups in China, per se, were coming from maybe Laos or India or whatnot. Um, but actually understanding that these people groups are indigenous to those nations, that they have called that nation home for centuries, but that they are a different ethnicity. They speak a different language. They have different cultures, traditions, religions. Um, it really was eye opening for me just to understand that there could be an entirely different people group, ethnicity living in a country, uh, very different than our kind of American um, melting pot kind of culture, where there actually are different subsets of people living in different countries. Uh, and many of these are actually kind of oppressed minorities, especially in places like China, where the Han majority is not exactly um, always kind or respective of the rights of these minority groups. They want them to speak the same language. They want them to be a part of the same cultural identity or religion. And so it's actually sometimes harder to reach these minority groups just because the governments they're living under don't want to recognize them as a separate group. They may just lump them in as a minority group, whereas we want to acknowledge their ethnic identity, acknowledge that they are a self identifying people group and that the gospel needs to go into their language and their culture so that we're not just, sending missionaries to China or sending missionaries to Nepal. We're actually trying to send missionaries to, the Tibetan peoples, the Lomi. We're trying to send missionaries to these specific people groups that otherwise would be overlooked either by us because we're ignorant, we're not from those areas, we don't know, or overlooked by their governments because their governments don't want to acknowledge that there is another nationality, another ethnicity living there. So, just getting practical here, Dwayne, can you walk us through a real example of a country that looks reached on paper, but still has major unreached populations hidden inside of it?
Yeah, I would actually say the United States would be one of those. Certainly, more Christians in the United States than in most countries, and maybe in any countries. And yet, so we have this rich history of Christianity here, but a lot of people, we have our own indigenous groups here too, First Nations, who have been just like you described. They've been like overlooked, oppressed, mistreated, relegated to just to the margins. But also we are a host country to many nationalities, but also many people groups. It's pretty interesting. Just in my little town, my hometown, it's so monolithic culturally. Growing up, there was just no diversity. And there's this mom and pop store, the country store in town, and I went there the other day, and they are now owned by this country store is owned by a Gujarati couple, you know, and that's just intriguing to me because I've always known who owned that store, and just to have, I think, the only Indian people in our town for sure, and then these other small towns. I mean, just the little podunk towns. And so, just to be able to go to them and be friendly the other day and just welcoming, because I don't think that they discover that very much in our town. I don't think they discover welcoming. But here's this. Now the Gujarati, they have the church among them, but they are still a very big, a very large. So Gujarati, they, Gujarat is a state in India. Gujarati is the language. So you have to go even deeper than that into, in the case of South Asia, you have to go into community, or what we have called in the past caste. Um, but these people, there are people from very restrictive, oppressive societies who have made their home in the United States. And so they come here, and we're about to celebrate 250 years of the founding of this country as a nation. And one of the big things that's elevated, one of the values elevated here is freedom, and specifically freedom of religion. And so people coming here, they encounter a totally different situation than back home, where they might have super restrictive laws and not even the ability to, um, certainly not to introduce somebody else to a different religion, but not even to change your religion, not to have that personal decision. And so, yeah, United States is certainly a country that we would not usually think of as far as unreached people groups, but they're here as either guests here, or they've made this their permanent home here. And what an amazing opportunity. One of our team with Joshua Project was just talking about bumping into Uzbeks in the library where she works, and didn't even know that Uzbeks were uh, even in town where she was. But so just, we have these opportunities all the time. We really need to have our eyes open to be looking for those opportunities, but then also our hearts open. I've been reading through the Old Testament again, and even in the New Testament, hospitality is like just a constant. It's a value that God has. It is not okay to be inhospitable. It's not okay in God's economy to be unwelcoming. And so we have the opportunity to uh, welcome and receive people from all over the world, and to offer them a blessing that we are always enjoying here in a religiously free country.
Yeah, so I think the importance of thinking about uh, people groups rather than just countries or even languages is twofold. One, it's important because we don't want to overlook these people. As I mentioned before, it's really easy for them to be lost under the geographic area they're in. We're sending missionaries to this country, so therefore they're being reached. It's not exactly true whenever there are um, different subsets, different cultures, and people groups living in those areas. So it's important because we don't want to overlook these people. But what I'm hearing you say, Dwayne, is that it's also important for us strategically. Um, because there are people groups living in what we call diaspora, living outside of their, traditional home context, that are in the US or in major European cities, that make them more accessible, make them a little bit more reachable. Um, and I think this is really important because a people group is a people group wherever they are in, right? So we don't necessarily have to leave our home country and go to their home country to reach like Gujaratis. We don't have to go to India to reach Gujaratis because a Gujarati in India and a Gujarati in the US are both part of the Gujarati people group. They are both part of this interconnected family and culture with the same traditions, value, religion. And so we have an opportunity to see an unreached or frontier people group reached without necessarily having to go to the country where they would traditionally live. And this is especially important for um, people groups that are coming from very restricted countries, closed countries, countries that are not welcoming or even oppressive towards Christianity. Um, and I think, especially today in our country, in the U.S., and also in Europe, there are large numbers of Muslims immigrating to these areas, and we can look at this as maybe a problem. We can see this as an immigration issue, or we can look at it from a kingdom perspective and see it as an opportunity to reach, like you mentioned, Uzbeks. It is very difficult for missionaries, church planters to move to Uzbekistan to get a visa there. Um, it is difficult to see the gospel penetrate that geographical boundary. But what we don't realize is that there are Uzbeks coming to our, libraries in Alabama or Georgia. It's an amazing opportunity. So Dwayne, tell us a little bit more about how we can intentionally engage frontier people groups right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, you used the word frontier people groups, which I just want to point out is just different than unreached people group. It would be a subset of that, and anyone who's kind of following Joshua Project for any time should understand that focus on frontier people groups. That's the most like the least reached of the unreached, and that would be like the best case scenario would be that 1 in 1,000 would be followers of Christ there, in a frontier people group. But I think to be intentional, we are going to, you mentioned about like people being in our backyard. But as you look at the world, we should be doing that, but it has to be a both and, not an either or, because the majority of the people groups in the world still cut off from the gospel deprived, are going to be in that area of the world. We've kind of classically for 30 years described that part of the world as the 1040 window. Some of your listeners will be, very familiar with that term. But the Great Commission always entails this element of going. It's always in there. And so certainly some of us can stay because the nations are among us, but the command is still to go. And so without that, I hear these things sometimes where it's just like if one believer would share the gospel with, so many other people, those plans never ever work because we are not near uh, the people who are the most gospel deprived, the most cut off from the gospel. And so that go element always has to be there. The unreached are among us, somewhat if we live in places like Europe, the United States, but the majority of them are not among us. They are over there. If you're living in South Asia, you are among the unreached. If you're living in North Africa, you live among the unreached. Indonesia, China, certainly India, and um, uh, that's where the concentration is. So intentionality means still going. Now, what that looks like today might look a little bit different than it did in my generation when I was growing up and hearing about missions, but just so easy to get on a jet and be anywhere in the world within, you can be pretty much anywhere in the world within like 2 days. Well, there's probably exceptions to that, but it's we're connected in a way we never have before, then as far as geography goes, but then we're in a digital age. People are more connected just across ethnicities, across people groups than they've ever been before. I think people are connected to that national culture, that dominant culture. And so there's a sharing of ideas that is going on that didn't used to go on among people groups. So with from someone in these remote villages to the dominant culture, but so yeah, the intentionality again of going, of seeing. I think we can't easily stumble upon strategic missions. I think we have to, um, you know, I think we just have to employ all that we can. Research, for instance, that's why I love working with Joshua Project, finding out who are the cutoff ones, who has been overlooked, who has been, you know, just not welcomed in yet. And so, always looking, um, who are the people. I mean, Jesus was always going to the marginalized. He was seeking out the people who were hated, who were overlooked, who were cast out and called unclean. Jesus was always pressing into who has not been touched with his love, his compassion.
Yeah, and that really gets into this idea of multinodal engagement. And so what that means is we're trying to reach each of these people groups with the gospel. We want to see them brought into the family of Christ. And so we just have these different levels, nodes of engagement, with the primary node always being their home country, where they're from, so that we can't have this idea of just like, yeah, our idea of missions is just that we're reaching the nations that have come to us. Uh, what that misses is as nations come to us, we want to reach them, but we also want to point them back to that primary node. And in that, our goal is to see a church planting movement in every people group living in India, in that 1040 window, North Africa. We don't want to settle for just, the low hanging fruit of the people that are right around us. We really do want to focus on that great commission call to go to the nations. Um, and that means picking up and moving cross culturally for these frontier people groups because there is no church present there. There is no gospel influence there to where they can reach their own people group without inside influence. Frontier people groups require cross cultural mission efforts, and that's difficult, but it is possible. And what multinodal engagement does is it gives you a second and tertiary option for reaching these people groups whenever that primary node is either inaccessible or you're just not able to get there yet. Um, and so these secondary nodes would look like these diaspora communities living maybe right in your neighborhood, maybe even in the same apartment complex, possibly one of your coworkers, people that are living in your area outside of their home community, but still have access to their home community. And so the goal ultimately isn't just to reach them, but to reach them and disciple them, train them, and in some way, shape, or form, send them back to that primary node to where they're becoming an indigenous church planter, bringing the gospel back to their home community. Wayne, have you seen any examples of that in your own life ministry?
Well, I'm most familiar with Mexico, so I'll keep there. But I, I love this story of I lived not far from Zapotec. I'm sorry, a Mixtec Indian town. I visited that place. Man, just felt real oppression. I saw in this. We went into this very humble house, just a dirt floor. Came into the door. There was a a table with just full of Catholic saints. Just there wasn't much in the room in the this house. It was like a one room house, but there was this table full of these statues to saints. That didn't surprise me. I had bumped into that a lot in Mexico, and I'm sitting with my back to this wall. And then when I went to go out, I hadn't noticed before, but there was something like a figure carved into the wall actually of the house, and it was like this head of this like monkey god, and like had its hands here and like a stack of coins, and it had the name of this, I can't remember the name of this monkey god, and it said in Spanish, protect us, and man, what an interesting juxtaposition of Catholicism, a form of Christianity, represented on this table on one side of the house, and this real animistic kind of idolatry, as I'm leaving. Just these people in this town just lived in deep poverty, but also just fear. You could just they just talked of fear of the unknown and the spirit world, and you could just feel it in that town. Um, However, there is light in that town. There is a church that's working there, indigenous mixed tech church, and that's all because someone who moved out of that town and went to the United States to work and was in California was just looking for work. And this man just saw, they came, I think he and a friend had come to this man's house and asked to do landscaping work for him. And the guy said, sure, I'd love to hire you. I have one condition. You have to go to church with me. And so they were like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. Happy for the work. And he went to the church, and soon after that came to Christ, became a believer, and this man who had hired him, who was a believer, he encouraged him, John, you've got to go back. You've got to go to that village that you grew up in, where the light is not. And so John obeyed that, and he went back. And today there is a small, very small church, needs still some help. But those are examples of what can happen when people um, go back, as you say, from one node to that main node. Um, sometimes that's not happening. It was really hard for that Pastor John to go to this back to his village hometown and plant the church. Um, it's maybe easier when we're talking about transient or temporary guests in a country, like say there's someone in university in London or something, and then they're going to go back. That makes more sense, at least is easier. But yeah, I believe that we should be challenging people who have had the blessing that we get to experience, and yet they're connected to a community that doesn't have that experience. I mean, our hearts should be breaking for those who, not just the lost, certainly should be breaking for the lost, but the lost who don't have. It's one thing if someone is cut off from Christ, or I should say, is not in not in the family of God, because they've made a decision to reject what they have. It's quite a different thing to not even be able to reject that because you don't have that story. So our hearts should just be turned towards those people um, that we could be effective among, and who could be who's most effective. Those who speak that language, know that culture, know how to communicate Christ back home, or in these nodes where gospel connection is not being made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you gave a really great example with universities. I've just seen personally, even in the rather small university that I attended, um, with a relatively small amount of international students, there were still students coming to that university from countries that traditional missions is just not really an option, um, especially students from North Africa and the Middle East, even some students from Southeast Asia. And these are students that are coming to America because they want to seek um, education, but also they're coming knowing that they're going to experience a new way of life, a new culture. They're open to new ideas, and in many ways, they are more open to the gospel than someone in that culture and in that tradition because they're not seeing you as an outsider coming in. They are the outsider coming to you. And so they see um, this as an opportunity to learn American culture. And so if you have a university in your city or near you, you have such an amazing opportunity just to, like Dwayne said, exercise hospitality. Invite international students into your home, take them out on meals, on trips, help them. One thing that I used to do is just really simple, help them get to the passport office, help them get to the airport, take them to the grocery store. These are just really simple ways to be hospitable, show them the love of Christ in a practical way, and then create opportunities for you to share the gospel with them, um, not just as an outsider looking in, but as a friend, as someone they can trust, as someone they look up to in some ways. Uh, and then, like Dwayne said, these people are usually trying to go back to their home country after this, and they have an opportunity to bring the gospel into their family, into their community back home, to become a church planter. All it takes is a bit of intentionality, a bit of discipleship, uh, and a world of opportunities has just opened up for you. Even if you don't necessarily feel called to be a missionary, you have an opportunity right in front of you to impact a frontier people group that otherwise would be really difficult to impact as a missionary. So, Dwayne, how does this people group thinking actually change the way that a church prays, gives, or sins? What does it look like on a really practical level?
Yeah. Well, I would even say on a personal level, for me, I grew up in a church where we would have uh, missionaries come and speak. And I don't know, some of our listeners will understand this, and some this will be totally foreign to them. But used to have the actual slide deck, like these slides that would go down in a projector. And man, I would love that because I didn't have to listen to a sermon. I could listen to these exotic stories from from around the world. But still, for me, it was so out there and yet nebulous. It was general. It was just a oh, there's people who need the gospel. We needed the gospel. You know, it was not specific. There wasn't a tie. It was this kind of again exotic, out there experience. For me, now that we know about more specifics, even in our family, this is changing things. Joshua Project has the Unreached of the Day app and emails and website and podcast. And uh, my son is 12 now, my youngest son, and he would always lead us at breakfast in praying for the unreached. And he started out just, I don't know, he had this sense of lack of security or safety when he was younger, so he was always praying for people groups in that context. Lord, help them to be safe. His prayers have evolved to where he's praying specifically like, God, help them to have the message about you like we do. It's just it his prayers are more focused and informed and directed, more precise. And then he's got a daily understanding of the diversity of people groups. But he's praying for a people group by name. We know their population. We know their primary religion. Sometimes we know, some very interesting things about their lives. It's not this nebulous concept out there anymore for us and for churches that would, um, you know, pray and give and send. It's precision now. It's about directed strategic focus in those areas. Again, the the praying, the giving, the sending. This is kind of a classic triad that we talk about, that churches and individuals can be a part of. Um, it's great that we're doing that, but let's be strategic. God has given us a mind. He's given us, we have this information. I mean, today we're praying for a people group um, that we never would have heard about before, before we had this data available and collected and presented in a very focused way.
And I have a friend. He gave me a really great idea, an example of what he does for his family. Um, Once a month, they will choose one of these people groups, especially one that lives in an area where the church is persecuted. And they will research a dish, a meal that is common in that culture. And because he lives in kind of the Dallas metroplex area, he'll go to one of these either Asian markets or halal markets, Indian markets, and he'll um, go and buy these foods that are, you know, a part of the culture that they've
And
chosen for that month to pray for. And he'll prepare this meal for his family and just share a bit about who that people group is. Um, if there's a specific. Very well may run into the people group he's praying for, or at least someone from that very near culture. I thought that was uh, an amazing, just little strategy to include this people group awareness into his family. Um, as far as churches, Dwayne, what is a specific step that churches can take in possibly adopting one of these people groups?
yeah, well, one of the things I've been with Joshua Project for almost 17 years, and I am saying this is not me being melodramatic. I can say that I'm more excited about what we're doing now than I've ever been since I joined that long ago and was just the third staff member at Joshua Project. Exciting things are happening right now. And so, in answer to your question, one of the most exciting things that we could never had the bandwidth for, and now with this growing staff, we can do is this adoption focus. Adoption of people groups was a concept that we used to hear about in the 90s, like mid 90s, and um, got some traction, and people were familiar with that. I think it kind of dropped off after a while, and just excited to know that Joshua Project has this focus now. So I would encourage people to go to our website, specifically like joshuaproject.net/people group adoption. I'd really encourage you to do that and step into the stream of reaching a people group. What I mean by that is maybe you're an individual, maybe you're a church, a missions pastor, an organization. Just how do you fit into making sure that a specific or a group of specific people groups, frontier people groups specifically, um, get the gospel? Now, what is your part in that? It can be these things that we've talked about: this praying, giving, sending. It could be you could be the one that goes. Um, so there's these pieces of adoption that have to be in place. Adopting a child is not a simple and quick. It's not like driving through fast food, to pick up your food. It's an ongoing, dedicated thing, and you don't do it in isolation. Adoption of a people group would be you and your church together with others, making sure that the what has been the history of a frontier people group regarding being cut off from the gospel, being gospel deprived, would change. And their history now would be, their story now would be that someone cared enough, prayed for them consistently, and cared to give and do whatever it took to see them come into the kingdom.
Yeah. And so what this is an opportunity for you and your church or small group or your family to actually connect with organizations that are working among frontier people groups. This is a really exciting tool. It's a free resource, and it helps you bridge the gap between where you currently are and the frontier of missions. This gives you specific prayer updates for the people group you've chosen. This gives you contact and connection with organizations that may be working among them. And this allows you to be personally invested and track the gospel moving forward into one of these people groups. Um, and so this is an amazing opportunity, just for you to make a commitment and say, one of these unreached people groups is my responsibility. It's our church's responsibility. And here we are, Lord. Send us whatever you ask. We're going to be a part of you, Lord, reaching one of these people groups. And so I just want to encourage you, like Dwayne said, go to joshuaproject.net/adopt and look for ways that you can partner in seeing one of these frontier people groups reached. Um, and so, Dwayne, some people might say that this feels overly technical or getting into too much data. I just want to share the gospel. Why do I need to know about um, all of these people groups and data? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm reading through the Old Testament, reading through the Bible once again, and just seeing that, if you read like Leviticus, Numbers, or even sections of Joshua, and some of it is so boring to some people. But if you pay attention to it, there's details there. And I know they say the devil is in the details, but I think really God and his people should be in the details. And it could seem a little bit maybe clinical to some, that, the data and these, spreadsheets, databases, and um, you know, we ought to be those who are the most informed. We get our name, Joshua Project, from one of those spies that was sent out to spy out the land and bring back a report. That person brought back, all of those spies brought back a detailed report. They even brought some of the fruit back, and it was important to get that back. That was crucial. It was commanded. And two of those spies we know, Caleb, Joshua, they brought back a report that was a positive report that said, God is with us. He is giving this into our hands. And in a spiritual sense, this is God giving something into our hands. This is the inheritance of the nations, not to own, but to bring into the kingdom, to be in the family together with us.
And just like Joshua and Caleb, we want to go out and survey the land and come back with all of these numbers, population, data, um, and not present it in a negative light, but show you an opportunity and say, look, this is not too big for our God. We
Mhm.
know that Christ has purchased a people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. And so, really, we can have confidence that each and every single one of these approximately 3,200 frontier people groups, that's almost 2 billion people today, each of these people groups will be brought into the kingdom of God. It's promised. And so it just takes us being obedient and responsible. Um, and so don't look at this as just a numbers game, but actually as a way to take that data before the Lord in prayer and make strategic decisions about how we use our missions and prayer resources. So, Dwayne, can you think of an example of how our data and people group information has changed or informed our mission strategy?
Again, harkening back to that age of where I think things we had, we approach things more generally. It's always been though that God's people have obeyed with strategy. I mean, I think a lot of people talk about William Carey and what he did with his world map. It was kind of revolutionary. It was cutting edge, information that he had. Um, but I think that it really is, if we'll obey and do this and follow those numbers that can be to some boring. Um, then I think we'll be strategic. We'll have uh, measured growth, and growth that we can measure, I should say. And I there's these things that we're hearing that, like, we're still sending out missionaries, but if you take 100 missionaries that are sent out, as far as we understand, the statistic is that 90 of those 100 would be sent among people groups that already have a church available. I'm not saying that we pull everybody out of where they're not working with unreached, but that's what we call the great imbalance. That shouldn't be. And so the reason that we do this is to send strategically. I like to think of these like puddles of water. If you threw a pebble into one puddle, what happens to the neighboring puddle? Nothing. And that's like people groups. We have to, gone should be the days where we just kind of, attack things in a nebulous trajectory. Instead, we ought to be precise. We should be measuring things. Has the gospel gotten everywhere? It has not. And I don't even mean geography. When I say everywhere, I mean among all peoples. So we need to be measuring that, and we need to make sure that that no one is overlooked, no matter how small the people group. There was a people group in Kenya, 800 people, the Dahalo people. There were like a couple of Christians among them, but no church, no established church, and the church was not growing. The gospel wasn't moving, outside of those two or three individuals. And a pastor from Nairobi went down, and he and his church committed to ensuring this people group would have a growing church, and they're no longer on our unreached list. And we can praise God about that. How long would it have taken for a people group of 800 to be on anybody's radar and reached with the gospel? So it's not just numbers. These are real stories of people tapping into the blessing, coming to know who Christ is, um, and not having to wait generations to hear that blessing.
And so, Dwayne, if someone is listening and they want to take one step towards becoming more aware of frontier people groups or taking a step towards reaching them, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, certainly go on our website. Our focus right now is on this, or always will be on the least of the least reached. And so you'll just bump into this term frontier people groups on our website, and in all of our resources. Even in the adoption program, we're currently just focusing on frontier people groups for adoption currently. So yeah, check out the Joshua Project, and check in often, because I won't say change is coming. Change is here for Joshua Project. Not just change for change's sake, but we we have the ability to do things that we've only dreamed about previously. Um, Exciting things are around the corner for this too, to just enable the church to obey the Great Commission.
Last question, Dwayne. How can people connect?
Yeah, easiest way is Joshua Project's email info@joshuaproject.net. I'll say that again. Yeah, our our um our organizational email info@joshuaproject.net. I'll personally see that. And if I don't have guidance for you, an answer for you, I'll find that for you. And we're very responsive. That's a value of ours. So don't hesitate. Please reach out to us. Questions. We'd love to walk through this with you and help you understand.
All right. So thank you, Dwayne, so much for joining us today. And thank you guys for listening. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe, share this with a friend, and stay tuned for more like this in the future.